Hello and welcome to what is a very special session of Digital Futures, our first ever session coming out of the Centre of Africa, New Hybridities Africa. Before I introduce the host today, I would like to just mention briefly tomorrow's session of the doctoral consortium, the series on AI, neuroscience and architecture. This is a very special session also. Jeff Hawkins is one of the most interesting figures we'll be covering, and he's an author of a best-selling book, A Thousand Brains, a new theory of intelligence that is revolutionizing the world of neuroscience and AI. So for today's session, I would like to welcome Neady Oduor, who is chairing the session today. Neady is a very special person herself. She studied in Dessau in Germany, an institution where I used to teach myself, and won an award for her project there. We have shown her project before, a really wonderful project for a kind of feminist collective, which I thought was so special because she was able to really insert social issues into the heart of architecture today. It wasn't about fetishizing form, it was about trying to address really important social issues in the spirit of the Bauhaus itself. Neady is now actually in Cairo, although she's also actually a fellow at the CCA in Canada, and she's operating remotely. It's really a great pleasure to be able to have Neady here today to chair this session. I will be handing over to Neady, who will introduce the guests, and then I will be coming back later to be involved in the discussions at the end. So welcome, Neady Oduor.
Thank you, Neil, for that humbling introduction. And thank you again, Digital Futures, for hosting another session on Africa. Today, the session is New Hybridities, and we'll be focusing on emerging African creators. So today we have 4 speakers from various regions of the continent. Africa, even though presented as such, is not a country. With 54 countries grouped into arbitrary regions, it is humble to present Africa as a monolith because each country represents a diversity of localities, peoples, cultures, and norms that shape the built environment of the region. The theme New Hybridities is fitting because to create as an African is to create in constant multiplicities. We must navigate hybridities of the post-colonial, post-industrial, post-industrial revolution, post-war, post-urbanism, and even currently post-architecture. This while living with the very real lived experience of being and living in Africa. This is also coupled by an urgency to design for an impending future, and it has given African creators an opportunity to rethink and redefine design in Africa. A monolithic African architecture or art may be a fallacy and is probably victim to the lack of formal or contemporary stylization, but there is a commonality in that it is bound and influenced by a specific way of life. Today's speakers present their interpretations of the hybridities in Africa. These projects demonstrate ingenuity alongside unique narratives, narratives of socio-cultural, political, technical, physical, and digital conditions that have and are shaping design in Africa. These narratives are finally shaped and are told by us. In these projects, you will see how emerging African creators are creating unique opportunities of thinking about multiplicities. So our first creator is an architect from Rwanda. So Lise Katangulia is a Rwandan architect and illustrator. She's the founder and editor of African Female Architects, a magazine startup and hub that celebrates and exposes the achievements of African female architects and designers. She's also director at her startup firm, Creature, the design lead at Atelier, and instructor at Architecture is Free. As an introduction of African women in architecture exists, it's a presentation that will be highlighting the importance of celebrating the existence of women in architecture and in the design field, and in recording their achievements and why the necessity of building this first generation community of African female architects is important. Welcome, Lise.
Thank you, Neady. Let me share my screen. I would like to thank Digital Futures World for this opportunity and for the empowerment and elevation of the African continent and the plan and the goals they have in terms of like empowering and educating one another. So yes, I'm the founder. My name is Lise Katangulia. I'm the founder of African Female Architects, which is an initiative that I started in 2021 because let me just tell you a background story. So 4 years in the School of Architecture University, I wasn't introduced to a female architect. 5 years later in the professional world, I didn't see or have any knowledge of a project both conceived and built by a woman in my own country. I read many wonderful articles throughout my career, but had not met with one African female architect. When I decided to test the waters of being an architect entrepreneur and leading my own firm, I encountered more questions about my ability, even when my talents and skills delivered, which also led me to question myself if I'd be really able to lead alongside my male colleagues in the field. So I almost gave up due to the lack of the right influence and supportive mentorship. So yes, I'm a young female architect, even being born in a family of only girls, with a strong in mothers and aunties. I don't know how to navigate the question from my male peers. Will you still be an architect when you have kids? Or comments like, you can be a successful architect when you're a woman, which I guess proves there is more to being an architect when you're a woman. So my story is not just mine. It relates to so many more aspiring and established architects. So I started researching on African female architects in order to empower myself to be able to start and build up my own firm. I needed to see women who were breaking stereotypes and shattering ceilings about can be done in Africa by Africans and very much by women who were also answering or finding solutions with the challenges found on the African soil. So we will start with a bit of research done by the Architecture Institute, American Institute of Architects. Uh, Basically, this relates to all these issues and challenges are faced by all women in the field. It's not just African or American architects, but all women in architecture. So the work-life balance impacts the representation of women. So there's so many concerns about why there is underrepresentation of women in the field of architecture, among other STEM fields. Concern about work-life balance is one. Long work hours that make starting families difficult, and thereby encouraging some women to leave the field. Lack of flexibility to work remotely, job share of flexible hours, and some of the ways that have been uh, researched or questioned to be able to retain more women in the field was to promote, for example, change in office cultures to allow better work-life balance and increase job flexibility. Other factors that impact the representation of women. If women take leave to start a family, they're not given significant opportunities when they return. There is lack of women role models. Pay is lower for women than men. Women are less, and if they are, their capacity is challenged. If women take leave to start a family again, it is hard to catch up because technology changes quickly. So one way or another to develop and to help retain again women in this field, especially with these factors, is developing mentorship programs for women in firms, offering credentials for architects who wish to return the profession after taking a break, providing clear written criteria for promotion, offering industry-funded college for women interested in studying architecture. So one of the other reasons that women may be able to attend or stay in school was the affordability of the school programs, especially in the country, or also the knowledge. So another way to help retain women effectively would be increasing community outreach into middle and high school by university architectural programs, This I've learned once I became a part of the Union Institute of Architects uh, in the program of architecture and children, where I learned that architecture is also taught to children under 18. But yet again, architecture is still brand new within this country itself. So how can we, from empowering ladies to attend university, how can we start tutoring and helping students learn about architecture before they just enter university? So so I founded African Female Architects not just as a means to empower myself, but to inspire more young ladies to be interested in architecture, to see what other ladies are capable of. So from that off start, to be able to see that it's a possibility. So currently, African Female Architects is a startup hub and the startup magazine, the virtual magazine that elevates, supports, celebrates the work and achievements of African female architects. We're also working, trying to work with institutes to establish a more powerful network that supports one another, that supports these ladies and records these African because these African female architects, their works, and also become a first database for African female architects. As an example, submission of AFA, African Female Architects Initiative, aims to eliminate inequitable disparity of African female architects in architecture by offering a holistic platform that brings belonging and creates support in all several phases of architecture. Whether it's in school, whether it's at the beginning stages of school, of university, after career, starting career, and in the middle of your career. So AFA initiative is a call for individual and shared advocacy to create an architectural profession that serves everyone. We must include everyone and ourselves. So with support and increased empowerment and greater sense of belonging, women can transform the profession now, and we continue to do so for future generations. Most importantly, this is the first generation of African female architects. I tried to actually research and find, look for African female architects who existed. I only have found very few who have departed, but currently the current living architects that we're seeing today are the first generation of African female architects. So this is the best time to start building their database. So while building the archive of architects, for example, if I just use research I find online of the existence of these ladies, their firms, and their works, and I'm talking about established architects, established entrepreneur, ladies who are running their own firms, there's almost a total lack of presence. So if I can find 18 architects online and perhaps 11 women designers, I know there's more than 100 who are not, whose work I can't find or whose existence I can't find online. So this works as a network and a collaboration, again, shared advocacy. So we set up a team of curators, editors, researchers, and basically everybody sends work and can write articles, can send in research papers that can be recorded to support the works of the entire network and the growth of the entire network. So collaboration consists on sharing these materials that help the community thrive all together. So in a sense, it's like a small minor university type of free education. Yeah. So advocacy and diversity, I studied, for example, in China, where I learned mostly about Asian architecture. So, but when coming back home or if I move into another country, it's important to learn more and to be influenced by different architects or backgrounds. So as a startup, we are planning to get into printing, but for now we're working in terms of exhibitions like this as one to improve the education system, to influence the existing and to share the works and the existence of African female architects in order to to sustain and improve, empower or add inclusion, like advocate for inclusion in platforms that exist today in the architecture world. So one way to do that is basically getting involved by learning, building collaborative support, and staying connected. So today I'm going to show you, I'm going to tell you, today I'm going to talk to you about 12 African female architects that currently exist, or that exist and that you should know about. This is part of the work we do. So we have Linda Mvusi, whose work I admire so much. Linda Mvusi was born in the Free State in South Africa. She has worked in the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg, and where she has been named in an award for excellence by the South African Institute for Architects in 2004. I believe these are some of the works we should be learning about, especially on the African continent as well. So Mvusi took an award for Best Actress at the 1988 Cannes Film Festival for her role in the film A World Apart. So part of what African Female Architects magazine does is to also extend architecture as a bigger branch than just building. So we feature work of creative art, creative mediums, but like we also want to show that architecture is not just, it can be based into so many different things than just buildings. So the Apartheid Museum opened in 2001 and is acknowledged as the permanent museum in the world dealing with 20th century South Africa, the heart of which is the apartheid story. The first of its kind, illustrates the rise and fall of apartheid. The exhibits include provocative film footage, photographs, text panels, artifacts illustrating the events and human stories that are part of the horrific history known as apartheid. Part of the museum, there's some graphic content, which I did not want to put, but so basically what we're going to focus on is basically the architecture. So we use the magazine as a architecture magazine, to talk about design, to share about the types of work, materiality, on all these things. So we focus on the building and all its aspects and features. So this is what currently the Apartheid Museum looks like. We learn about the reason why different things are done within these works. We look at materials. We look so basically giving identity to architect and meaning to the works being done in the country. I mean in the continent. Okay. So another architect, Mariam Kamara, which I believe most of you know, is the founder and principal of Atelier Masoni in Niger, an architecture firm whose interest lies in designing culturally, historically, and climatically relevant solutions to special problems inherent to the developing world. Without going so further deep into the biographies, is that the reason we share also biographies of these architects is because we want to break the stigma of understanding that you can be a successful architect if you have been exposed to Western education. So we started sharing their journeys into architecture field. And for example, Mariam Kamara didn't do architecture to begin with, and she did a master of architecture. That's how she became an architect. So these stories also play a role in terms of empowerment and helping others find themselves into, relate to the stories and find themselves in the narrative. So this is a project called Hikma, a religious secular complex. It was completed in 2018. So the project is a culture and education hub where the secular and religious peacefully coexist to cultivate minds and strengthen the community. Hope you can hear me. All right. So the new library is impactful by providing books, computer lab, and quiet study spaces to improve reading and vocabulary skills for the community and to increase graduation rates. By involving women groups in the project, additional spaces for literacy, accounting courses, and workshops were added. As a mosque, women never used the current building, preferring to pray at home. So the library and its proximity to the new mosque engage them and the youth positively with these religious spaces as productive members of the community. The project introduces compressed earth bricks here, made with laterite soil found on site, a new material in the area with the advantage of being lower maintenance than adobe, with similar thermal benefits. Most of the project materials are sourced from less than a 5-kilometer radius distance to the site, while the use of concrete is limited to structural elements such as columns and lintels. So basically, this is also one way of learning about or teaching about materials and new technology, building technology, especially locally sourced and sustainable to the community. By sharing the building, the type of building, and researching on sustainability and all these things. Yeah. So the Denji Market, another project by Atelier Masoni. The design of this product is kept very simple, using a colorful recycled metal canopy produced through a succession of individual shading structures that compensate for the difficulty in growing trees in such an arid desert climate. It is thus provides solar. These canopies provide solar shading provides shade. The different levels vary from central ventilation as well, while precipitating hot air to the top disk. It provides solar and thermal protection to the venting spaces underneath. The result in a whimsical wall that complements the colorful goods on display while protecting patrons from the scorching sun. The project as well uses the new material, compressed earth bricks, in the region where one uses mostly cement or adobe. The first is too costly. Cement is too costly, increases ambient heat, while adobe is negatively impacted by the strong rainy season. So using compressed earth bricks offers an excellent method for integrating earth-based construction with contemporary demands of construction industry while maintaining the thermal advantages associated with adobe for climate as hot and arid as Nigeria. Next, we have Catherine Mary Otin, also known as Kit Otin of Kit Otin Architects. She's a South African architect who has won numerous awards for South African traditional work. Born in Durban, Kate Otin attended Redeem School in South Africa. She then studied architecture at the University of the Witwatersrand. And once Otin established her own firm, just 1 year after her own education. So she has designed community libraries, the Waterfront Development at Benin, and Art Therapy Center, and so many others. She has won many awards, and she became the president of South African Institute of Architects in 2020. So this is a community library one, Oliphant Fontaine, that serves the low-income community, providing much-needed access to books, information study space, and meeting space for community groups. Conceptually, the library was designed as a grid of tree-like columns holding up a canopy that created protection below from the elements. This referenced the original blue gum trees that were found on site, which had to be removed due to the site conditions restricting of the new building. The scale of the building is such that it has a presence in the community without overshadowing the neighboring building. Kindly let me know when my time is up. So this is the women's goal, which means women's jail originally. So these types of projects hold history, material, resource and knowledge, and so many resources to be shared to all types of communities of Africa. So the women's jail was built in 1909, is a fine example of English prison architecture of that era. It is better known, however, as a place where women and capacitated activists were unjustly imprisoned. The world precinct of the World Women's Jail has, through this project, been in part restored and in part adapted for reuse as exhibition and office space. The two new office buildings have also been integrated. So, as a testimony to the jail's transformation from a place of oppression and brutality to a place where human dignity is restored, the new office buildings house the Commission on Gender Equality and the other human rights commissions. This design enhances the cultural significance of the site, provides an eloquent platform for the voices of the women who in previous decades were silenced. So architecture, rather than being a passive heritage artifact, becomes a prompt for renewal without compromising the respect due to the past. Next, we have the ladies of Orsner Architects and Associates. Rosemary Orsner studied architecture at the University of Technology in Austria. After university, she co-founded Orsner and Associates in 2003 and Orsner Associates Ghana in 2006 together with Martin Orsner, her husband. Her knowledge and understanding of both cultures, being born and raised in Ghana and her family's construction company, and her education architectural practice in Austria are key factors for successful collaboration with both international and local clients and partners. So Akosua Obeng studied architecture at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology and graduated in 2005. She became a partner in Austin Associates in 2016. She writes essays and articles on sustainable architecture and various projects for Austin Associates. Her writing plays a part in keeping Austin Associates in the media and educating readers of architecture and sustainability. One of the very well-known projects among so many great others, so is the IFC head office, World Bank, which is has actually gotten certificates for green building measures. So the approach to environmental sustainability youth was integrated in this one, with many of the architectural and structural and trade design forms being the direct consequence of clients' desire to build green. Located in an urban context, so the shape and form of the building has been done specifically designed to optimize the use of the natural system. So let me try to fast forward. Aziza Shoni project of architect was born and raised in Morocco. So prior to creating Aziza Shoni project, she with different viewers and partners such as Takako Katajima. She has won several top design awards commissions, and she's an associate professor at the Daniel School of Architecture, where she leads the Design Ecological Tourism Lab. Studying one project at a time for every architect. So, for example, one of our projects, this is in the category of affordable housing. ECO R plus 2 is an affordable housing typology based on the common R plus 2 Moroccan housing typology. This was project incentivized by tax cuts to developers from the Moroccan state, provided in order to alleviate affordable housing shortage in the country. So this was designed to increase social residents by providing larger spaces, a roof garden, and inclusion of social gathering spaces on the roof. So yes, we do different follow through different projects and design. This was renovation of a library that existed since built in 859. Our next architect is Justine Oshinovo, who's a Nigerian architect, entrepreneur, and public speaker and author. She's known for her works on the design of Maryland Mall. She's incorporated her own architecture design consultancy in 2011 called CM Design Atelier. And she's also the founder and executive lifestyle furniture creative director of Ile Ila House of Line. Sources Energy is an alternative energy company operating across Nigeria. CM was requested to design a public defense bank building to accommodate a new age company. The office space has to accommodate different sectors of the company. The engineers on the ground floor to more corporate finance and legals on first floor. So again, here we're focusing on materiality, interior design, minimalist. Yes, and she does a lot of she mixes a lot of minimalism and brutalist in her work. So this was Maryland Mall, the big black box, and there's contrast to brutalist minimal experience. The interior opens up to warm light palette with all the pomp and pageantry for shopping experience. So yes, there's a lot of architects that exist and they were looking at and they were celebrating, such as Shasha Akala and Kasim again from France, and Tunisia. Not going through so much. I'm just going to skim through their projects. So this building, the Palm, was designed around the theme of typology of southern Mediterranean climates. The patio inserts the house ladder in the multifamily apartment building to create a typology of the traditional house through the patio. The garden of idea is to bring vegetation to the upper floors, creating shade and freshness. So basically, different ways to look at a design and stitching it for free. Valerie from let's focus someone from Central Africa. So Valerie is from Congo Brazzaville, a young architect and founder of Atelier Tropical. She uses mainly she focuses mainly on bringing topics, making her projects more tropical, especially from the base where her projects mostly are in Congo on the equatorial line. So basically, she works on those ends. So we have various variety, a lot of spectrums. How can you bring in contemporary African styles into your project and have inspired products as well within the project. So some of the how can I say elder architects we have apart from Lise is also Anya van der Merwe. She graduated in 1984 from University of Cape Town. She also she has owned an award-winning architectural practice that she founded in 1991 called Van der Merwe Mrs. USC Architect. And she left as a director in 2016, but works once in a while because her husband still is an architect. So this is some of her earliest works. Just again, we also have Victoria Mao Hillman, who is the founder of Tanzania Women Architects Humanity, where they volunteer with different organizations and empowers ladies through her work to help communities in need of knowledge and their expertise. This is an example of their project, Isaro Girls School, which is a prototype of many other projects they're planting in Tanzania to humanity to different NGOs. Gillian Hall is also an architect from South Africa who looks at contemporary modern styles of architecture, and she has also won quite an amount of awards for her work. And then to end this with Sumaya Bali, who was the lead designer for the 2021 Serpentine Pavilion. I'm sure most of you might know her. I'll just close with I don't know if you, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, I think that's the end because the video is not able to play right now. But I'll share the link and you can find more of our work online. And this is one basic way of emerging and developing the continent itself is by by including and elevating more leaders into the work that the field, and that's basically it. That's what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Lise, for that. Really, it's something that is quite close to my heart, and I'm glad that you are starting something that's almost archival and is a repository of work that is important, and looking forward to having the discussion with you. So our next presenter is Maxwell Mutanda. Maxwell is a lecturer in environmental and spatial equity and co-director of equality, diversity, and inclusion at the Bartlett School of Architecture, University College London. His work investigates the role of globalization, climate, and technology within the built environment. Maxwell has been an editorial contributor to the Architectural Review and is currently a trustee on the board of Medial, an international media arts charity and arts festival based in New York. Looking forward to hearing about your work, Maxwell. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Neady. That was really a generous introduction. And thank you, Lisa, for your presentation. It was quite learning. So I am going to share with you some work that I have done in Harare, Zimbabwe, that really looks at digital research, but also digital networks within this idea of hybridity. So really trying to understand how our built environment, our urban geographies and our virtual geographies are interlinked, but in particular through the lens of a country with the most expensive internet in the world. The work really focuses in on commuter taxis, which are omnipresent throughout the so-called Global South, which is informal networks that link people's homes and businesses and schools. So in the context of Harare, well up until the 80s, we had a formalized transit network that was run as a parastatal. And it really accounted for the transit of migrant labor from the indigenous Black community to service the mostly white neighborhoods of the city. Following independence in the 80s and the liberalization of the real estate market, the system essentially broke down and led to the commuter omnibuses, which we have now, which I mentioned, these sort of independently operated networks, which are, although licensed by the state, really operate at the fringes through a non-standard labor geographies. And they don't necessarily have an outwardly facing public information. So the goal of this project was to try and map the routes in the city of Harare. So I'll just share a brief video to give context for those who may not be aware of what I mean. So here you see these majorly Toyota vehicles that can seat 15 to 18 people. So this just kind of follows the route leading up to a hub in the city center. So, why is the internet important in this case? So Cable, which is a price comparison website and service based in the United Kingdom, did a global survey of over about 120 countries. And at the time, they revealed that Zimbabwe had the most expensive internet of any of the countries that they surveyed, averaging at about $72.20 for 1 gigabyte of mobile data. For comparison, at the same time, the least expensive internet connection was in India, where 1 gigabyte of mobile data cost about 26 cents. So this kind of fact of expensive internet sits concurrently with this idea of this quite high mobile penetration within the country. So Zimbabwe, like most countries on the African continent, had this kind of digital leap because access to landline telephones was limited to settler communities. Most people didn't have a phone connection before mobile phones came. And so the uptake of mobile telephony was quite high. And it's sort of one of the highest in the English-speaking world at over 90%. So you have this duality wherein a lot of people have access to digital networks, but digital networks, by virtue of their cost, are inaccessible. So I'm going to share this comparison of planning a journey to, let's say, the airport from my home, where at the time I was living in Cape Town, and my home in Harare. So on the right, you see Harare, on the left, you see Cape Town. And this is using Google Maps, looking at the options of how to get to the airport. And as you can see, Google provides quite a few options using public transit, but in Harare, it will only tell you can either walk for 6 hours or you have to have your own private motor vehicle and drive there. So this gap in the public-facing information within the increasingly connected world was a goal of the project. So firstly, we identified a third-party app, Transit One, which allowed us to freely collect GTFS, this so-called General Transit Feed Specification data, and allowed us to count the number of passengers as well as map the GIS data of the routes throughout the city. And we did this using a volunteer network of professionals, of school-going young adults, and we took close to 400 journeys to map this route. So here's the screenshot of how the app works. So it allows you to name the route as you like, describe it, put some notes, vehicle type. All these are optional, but depending on the level of information you want to get, and then the capacity. And when you start the journey, you can mark the number of people that's on the minibus to start, as well as the number of stops and when people exit or board the vehicle. And here's a quick screenshot of the kind of data that's generated. So what we did is we took this data of the stops and the route. It's interesting and worth noting that one of the functions of informal networks such as this is that they're a true ride-hailing service, in that passengers can request their pickup and drop-off points as they like. So the stops here are really by request and not necessarily a quote-unquote bus stop. So it was more important for us to map the route, and also the fact that the route can change according to the needs of the passenger or the economic needs of the driver and the conductor. And we got into this phase of how to visualize this data in a way that is legible. So I'll confess having a background in architecture and being quite preoccupied with the way things look. So here is a video of all the routes individually mapped. And what became quite self-evident at this time was that because of the design of the city, you had this kind of concentric pattern, which for us resembled sort of like a clock face. And so in identifying the routes, we decided to use prefixes according to the face of a clock. So from 12 or 0 to 11. And then we mapped these routes in the city of Harare. From their start to their finish, highlighting points where the routes can diverge or multiply and have options and intersect. So as well as this overall view of the city, we mapped the hubs within the city, these kind of terminuses where the routes end up. And so multiple routes along the same trajectory have the same prefixes. So for example, on the right-hand side of this image, you see all the routes prefixed by the number 2, numbering from 0 to 5, 3 from 0 to 6, and so on. And then we color-coded them just for the sake of visual representation, but in no means did this mean anything to the routes themselves. And then along the way, you can see throughout this, we highlighted points of interest. So postal services, schools, attractions, fire stations, etc., as we put the map together. And then if we look here on the extremities, we had a few routes that didn't go into the center. So this route here prefixed by the letter C sort of cuts across the city and links what are essentially divergent routes together, which is an oddity. And also you can see here on Route 100 that there is sometimes different options of travel, which we indicated here with dotted lines to sort of say sometimes the routes would divert either to find passengers or according to needs. And this resiliency was something that we really wanted to showcase as a positive aspect of these digital networks. So here, giving you a summary of the 58 routes that we managed to take, the over 300 trips, and as a way to understand the city of Harare. I think that ends it. So it was really a way of seeing that the future in which we all start to inhabit means something completely different in the context of sub-Saharan Africa. And it was quite an enlightening way of highlighting it. So thank you for that. I will end there.
Thank you so much, Maxwell. I think this project really spoke to me. I remember when I saw it, it was really because I'm really interested in the datification of the urban and especially the African urban fabric. So this project is definitely something that I think could lead to a lot more things, and I'm looking forward to the discussion after it. So next presenter is Mohamed. So Mohamed Hamdi works as a research associate at Galal University, and he's an alumnus of TU Berlin. He holds a Master of Science degree in urban development. He has experience in environmental planning and energy saving techniques. He works as a tutor at a research tutor at TU Berlin's architecture department, and he works on digital modeling of cities, artificial intelligence, and energy simulations. As part of his thesis, he worked as an intern at Freie Universität Berlin in the city climate department and took part in many projects related to urban informality, capacity assessment, refugees, and culture heritage, with funding from the UN Habitat, UTI, and DAAD in different countries like Germany, Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan. Thank you so much, Mohamed. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks for your introduction. And then I'm very happy to be with the Digital Futures family and with Africa family as well. I'm here to present the urban development experiences overseas. Why overseas? Because I'm based in Germany and then I moved to Egypt again. So I try to transfer as much as I can from my experiences to Egypt. And then to show that, or to introduce myself, I have a bachelor degree in architectural engineering from Asset University, and then I worked as architect and then BIM coordinator, and then I moved to Germany to have my master's thesis in urban development at Technische Universität Berlin, and then I worked also as intern in city climate department in Freie Universität, and then after that I worked as tutor in Delta TU Berlin partnership, and then worked as in the neighborhood management in Hurghada, and then also a researcher at urban mobility, land governance, development priorities with refugees, and then also I worked as a researcher in cultural heritage, and as well I worked finally at research associate at architecture, design and digital architecture faculty of Galala University in Egypt. And then, as I told you, I was based in Germany and I have to transfer my knowledge to Egypt. And how I can do that, I try to search a lot about how I can help, and my topic will be related to impact of the urban fabric on thermal comfort and energy consumption by enhancing the sustainable urban fabric design of new cities in Egypt. And this is a project is partnership between Technische Universität Berlin and Freie Universität Berlin, where I did my thesis. And actually, it is this one chapter of a lot of chapters that I try to help and transfer my knowledge. And maybe in the next sessions with Digital Future, in another sessions, I will try to present it with you. And then when I searched about the problems, I find there is a problems in Egypt, which is overpopulation, climate change, urbanization, and because of population as well and climate change, there is a power shortage. And then how I can solve all of these things, it comes from urban fabric. I find it's a common factor between them. And then by urban fabric, I can control the overpopulation, and then also I can control the urbanization, and then also I can control the climate, because for sure from the literature view, I can see it is affecting the climate change, and I adapt with it, and then we will have a less energy consumption and cooling and heating demand, and then we will have a less power shortage in Egypt. So, but as well for the urban fabric, it has a bad impact on the environment, because there is a phenomena called the urban heat island. This phenomena is, if I can describe it easily, the Earth, it has to reflect its heat onto the outer space, but there is a greenhouse gases which is reflecting the heat again to the urban areas, and then these urban areas is more heated and has raised temperature, and then it is it has a lot of energy consumed in heating and cooling, and the rural area is more perfect and has a better environment than urban areas. And then also how we can control this urban heat island effect by the urban fabric again. So urban fabric is coming to me ever and ever again. But then when I try to search about the urban fabric and the effects of the urban fabric, actually, I mean it will be black, because that's what I arrived for. It's a black, because the literature review is just a literature review talking about the urban fabric and the effects of the urban fabric, but I can't calculate or simulate the effect of the urban fabric on the urban heat island. And then after a lot of research, there is a light which is coming from the end of the tunnel with a group of MIT that developed a basic preliminary tool which can did the weather analysis only for the urban heat island. And then I find another problem as well, which is related to the urban fabric in the cities. And in the new cities in Egypt, it's, as you can see, it's a 4 new cities in Egypt, but it has the same configuration. It has the same urban fabric as well. And there is no consideration for the climate, and there is no spatial allocation. And then if there is a city which is near from the sea or in the desert or in the middle of the green, they don't allocate it according to the climate. And then we don't have an environmental urban planning. So my effort is trying to figure the urban fabric configuration and adapt it with the local climate. Then we will have a better energy efficiency. So we will work on weather and energy, and this leads me to 2 steps. The first one is doing the literature review to select the urban configuration, which is affecting the energy efficiency, and then try to get from it some recommended values that I can use it in my simulation. And then the next step is a simulation to use the study to study the behavior of this urban fabric, which I get from a literature review, and then also to try to do the simulation of this recommended value, and then get a guide with a recommended value for the design for especially a one spatial area, and introduce it to the municipality and to the government, to the urban planning authorities, so they can use it, and then we will have a better environment for everyone. And then for the case study, I chose New Asyut City because it's my hometown and I'm very proud to be part of it. So, and also because I have a lot of information, I have a lot of contacts there, so I can arrive to it. And then I chose a residential case study, a residential unit. And then I did the simulation for the whole city and for this neighborhood. And from the literature review, we decided to divide it into 3 configurations, to 3 categories. The first category is for the whole urban fabric, which is density or compactness, land use, transportation, urban vegetation, corridors design, and then the urban fabric shape. And the second one is the impact on the streets design, which has factors related to the type of streets, street widths, street orientation, and also the surface of the material, which is albedo, and then building cross section. And the last one is building design, which has the albedo of the building, courtyards, building heights, building forum, and then also the building attachment and building orientation. And then in my methodology, I try to do a simulation, as I told before, between weather and energy to see the effects between of them and how the urban heat island affects on the energy. But unfortunately, I didn't find. So I get the methodology of coupling between coupling technique between 2 softwares of simulation, with the UWG, which is developed by the MIT with my modification, and then also with the design builder right after that. And then at least we will have, at last we will have the guide of urban fabric. So we will have an EBW file, which is coming from the airport with the ruler without affecting the urban heat island. And then I will take it by the rhino, grasshopper, and then we will have the EBW file modified with the urban heat island effect, and then I will use it in the energy simulation, and then I will have a better representation about it and get the comparative analysis. So the first one, the urban heat island with the UWG, I modified it by adding 4 more plugins, which is Ladybug, Honeybee, Butterfly, and Dragonfly. And then that is the whole flow of the simulation of the rhino grasshopper thing. And then I can divide it into the first one was the intervention on the building level. And then I added the building age, building typology, which is residential or commercial, and then the solar heat gain, wall albedo, roof to floor, and floor to floor ratio. And then the second one, is on the city level, which is divided into defining the urban parameters, including vegetation, including the pavements, including the traffic. And the next one defining the city whole as the whole city itself, which is containing from the terrain, trees, grass, and the data which is coming from the buildings. And the last one is doing the urban heat island simulation, which is with the tool developed by the MIT group. And then we will have all of these data entered in this plugin, and then we will have visualizing the results with an EBW file with the results and comparison in visualizing results between the weather before and after. And then also we did the simulation with the design builder for these buildings and these units. And then we did the validation by doing the validation of this simulation. And then we had a site measurements, and we talked with people about their expectation about the weather and how they can, the local thermal comfort will be. And then from that, we had a set of different simulation, like in a building ratios, different building heights, orientations, building attachment, and we had all of them under simulation. And from these simulations, we had a comparative analysis between literature and our vision, and then we will have the recommendation. I will give 2 examples because it's too much of a lot of examples. I'm just here to show the methodology. Maybe one of you will get the same methodology and do it in his country or his place, and then we will have a better environment for all. So starting with the density in the literature review, we will know that a dense area is better in hot arid climate, like in Egypt or Africa. But then also there is a lot of question which is popped up in our mind, like in a dense area could block the ventilation because it's too dense, and then also the pressure on satisfaction of service level, because when it's the area it's more dense, then we will have a pressure more on our service levels. And then also the thermal loads from this area, because it's dense and has a lot of electric equipments and tools, it emits a lot of thermal loads, which is raising the temperature of the area itself. And then from our simulation, we get that we have 5 cases, and our 4 cases, which is fourth case, which is a linear urban fabric. It has a more dense, but it has less exposure to the sun, and then it saves more energy and it's better. But however, the case 5, which is more common in Egypt, it has a very bad impact on the thermal comfort and environment, and it means consumes a lot of energy. And we did it for the cooling, lining, and heating demand to see the effect of all of them. It happened also for the quartz. Quartz for me, it was really astonishing, because when someone doing the design for hot arid climate, they always recommend quartz as the best solution. However, quartz in the simulation shows the solid alternative, which is the first one, which has no quartz actually, is the best solution, because when you are doing the quartz in some climates, it has more facades exposed to the solar exposure, and then you will have a lot of heat gain on the building itself, and then it needs a lot more to cool it. And then if you are doing the court, then you will have another option to cool the place, like evaporative cooling or something like this. It's not the only solution for you to use the courts. And then right after that, we had a full schedules for recommendation, literature review, and we have collected them all in a guide. And then I went to the people in New Asyut City, and then I did a stakeholder meeting and asked them about their opinion if we can implement these things or not, actually in their existing neighborhood. One of these recommendations, like planting trees with a high canopy, with a different combination of trees, or the building albedo, which is the paint of the facades or something like this. And then we had a lot of conversation about how we can do it and how we can arrange it with the municipality in the new city. And then they started to do it. Actually, I was about to post some pictures, but I didn't have the time to post it here. And maybe I will show it in another session for the ongoing project about renovating this area. And then also from this, we have also this guide send it to the authorities in the urban planning in Egypt to take it in consideration, and then maybe they can use it. And then at last, I did that comparison about the contradiction with the current situation, laws and regulation, because actually in Egypt they have a code for buildings, but they don't consider the urban scale. And then they must consider the urban scale as one factor and affecting the buildings, and they have to also include it in the code, and then also change the regulation according to the place. It shouldn't be for the whole country. It should be allocated for the whole place and leave it for the municipality to decide it, dependent on the scientific method research, and also for the building heights, and then for the building width and the building design, it should be left to the people opinion. And then also they have to change the code, and then deliver to the parliament, and then to the authorities to use this new codes, because there is no energy efficiency codes in Egypt related to the urban scale. And then also toward an effective energy efficiency policies to raise awareness about energy efficiency, because we are talking about climate change and how climate change is affecting everyone. Then we must take a serious steps about it. It's not about talking the energy efficiency in televisions or something like this. You have to talk with people. You have to go with them and those stakeholders, and then recommend them about these things and how they can reserve energy, and telling them that it's really in your favor to do it. And then also we have to have an informative system to warn citizens about their overloading, and also it's an obligatory thing to have the sustainable energy sources in each governance and governorate also to generate energy. And then also it should be incentiveness for landowners to follow an energy efficiency plans, like reducing taxes or facilitating permits for them, and also introduce the passive design techniques as one of the principles in the building design codes. And at last, the conclusion, there is an energy problem in Egypt and no one can deny it. And then also we have to go to the renewable energy. Urban fabric is one of the most important, crucial things that we have to follow, and also the compactness has a great effect in Egypt. And then we should take care about the compactness, but however we should take care about the service and how we should load on services. And then also in the new cities there is no mixed land use. We should introduce mixed land use as is one of the most effective ways to energy efficiency. And then also encourage public mass transportation, not individual one, especially in these new cities. And then also urban vegetation, it must be with a high canopy, because the urban vegetation in this area is very poor, with a less canopy that doesn't make shade or even shading the buildings itself. And then also the urban fabric should adapt to the climate, as we said before. Lighting is the only aspect, because in code they considered lighting, but they don't consider the air ventilation, the cooling and heating demand for the building, and they must introduce it as well. And then at last, if we should follow these things, we have to, as architects, our rule is to go and talk with people and convince them about it, not to talk about it, that we have to do energy efficiency. It comes from the individual and from the public. And then this participation loads, it gives a lot for the implementation. And then at last, that is one chapter from my efforts that I try to transfer my knowledge into Egypt. But there is a lot of things that maybe I can share some examples of them. Maybe in another session, I can share it with you. Thanks for your patience and listening to me.
Thank you, Mohamed, for your presentation. I think it brought to us the technical side, and also thinking about how thinking about African architecture, or particular contextual architecture, needs to be technical, thinking about climate and everything else. Looking forward to the discussion. And our final presentation is going to come from Bruno Ruganzu. Bruno Ruganzu is a multimedia artist known predominantly for his work intercepting the waste stream and recycled playgrounds. His practice is about transforming waste into interactive art installations and structures that are collectively built by the public as participants, not only as an audience. Currently, he is doing a PhD in design and visual culture at Kiambogo University, and holds a master in an MA in pedagogy from Oslo Met University, and has a Bachelor's of Arts in Industrial Design. He's also a lecturer at the Department of Art and Design, where he teaches sculpture and painting in Kampala, Uganda, where he lives. He's also the founder of TEDx Kampala and runs an artist residency called Eco Art Uganda, and also runs Ubuntu Talks in Africa. Welcome, Bruno. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Neady. That was an amazing introduction. I feel honored to be amongst this first batch of African creatives who are coming in to share about their work on the continent, and as a reminder to our indigenous knowledges and how we get to practice and live with them. I would like to share that I believe in the policy of building together, and I believe that comes from also our purpose of living as humans on this planet. In environmental art, we tend to introduce the fact that this universe is for us all, but we have borrowed everything from our children. So whatever it is that we are working on, we should consider the future generations. As we look in the slide, I'm sharing work from Nachi Valley, which is a project that we did in 2019. And it is situated in the southwestern part of Uganda in a district called Isingiro, which is one of the oldest refugee settlements in the world, and currently number 8 on the most populated settlements in the world. And the reason why I ended up in Nachi Valley is that as a Ugandan living in Kampala, as a student and also a teacher, I was so always curious about what it was to be in a refugee camp. And I took a journey with a couple of my friends after building lots of sculptures and playgrounds around the world. We felt that there was a need in this refugee settlement that wasn't addressed, and we didn't want to wait for help from everywhere else except from what we have as our own resources. So this idea was generated by going to the refugee settlement and being as human as we could be, to find stories that people come with, the potential, the skills, and every one of us knows that anybody who is human, especially in the current situation where the world is, they are always afraid of what is coming next. And this settlement has over 100,010 people that live in this space. And at the reception center, we have people received from different countries who have fled from war and other reasons to come and start life in Uganda. And of course, they take 2 to 3 years to be relocated. And for me, my concern was about the child who's staying here and maybe has no place to play. And we had to start from the stories of children by collectively thinking, how could we come together as designers, as architects, as engineers, as artists, to address a common cause. Because when you look at the potential that is always seated on, is that everyone who has fled has brought some unique talent and skills. And what we did was to look at how can we get ideas from their children, especially when not all of them are drawing or they can write by themselves, but also tapping into the fact that as Africans, we've been sharing knowledge through storytelling and songs. So we performed a number of participatory projects whereby ideas were got from the children, and we molded this this sculpture of an elephant, which was a memory of an 8-year-old child while coming to Uganda. And the idea was that we are going to make this playground and use any material that we have. As an artist, I see that we intervene and get to spaces where our work actually is much needed. That's one of the reasons we believe in a community needs project at even the university, Chambogo University, where I live and work. And the people that participated in building this project were all forms of cobblers, carpenters, and the idea came to reality because of the collective effort. I do believe that in this space, we are talking about pedagogy of knowledge and sharing skills, especially when we look at the value of technology and in innovation when we use our voices as Africans. I do believe as well that such platforms are an opening step for many of us to inspire each other to grow and see what the future holds. And the sculpture that you see has a way to enable people to rethink where they're coming from and where they're heading. With that, I would like to say that I'll be happy to be open in the discussion to talk more about the other projects that I've been working on, especially when it comes to participatory art and how to involve art and architecture in public spaces, especially when we are looking for advocacy in these spaces in our countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bruno, for your inspiring presentation. I'm really looking forward to knowing more about your work, especially now that we've connected. And I think your work is really inspiring, especially that you work with participatory design, which I think is something that is relevant within our context as Africans, because design does happen, especially within communities. I think now I will open us up to discussion, maybe a comment from Neil or anyone else, and then we can go into discussions.
Oh, thanks, Neady. This has been amazing. I mean, incredibly, we found out so much today. I think it's one of our most important sessions. So I just want to thank the presentations. They were all mind-blowing, and I think we found out a lot that we just simply didn't know about. It's now on our radar. I want to just mention one thing. The one person that we haven't mentioned, I think, is Leslie Loco, who is importantly the curator of the Venice Biennale for next year, which I think is very significant. Leslie was herself involved in setting up schools of architecture, and it almost seems like the crucial question right now is the question of architecture education, because many of you ended up studying elsewhere. And Leslie, I think she set up one in the School of Architecture at the University of Johannesburg, the first ever master's course. And also then she went to set up the African Futures Institute in Ghana. So she was instrumental in I think, also raising those questions. And of course, she's been part of the Bartlett for a while. She studied there and so on. I think that the key question is almost like the issue of education. I mean, I think what came across very strongly was that there's not so many female students of architecture. Meanwhile, in elsewhere in the world, actually, most of the students, I would say, are now female. The students of architecture are female. So it's a very different picture we're getting in Africa, and I think even within Africa there's a very different situation. I think that South Africa has had its established schools of architecture for some time. I think other countries too, but not so much so. So I don't know whether we could just reflect on that a moment. Are things changing over there? Maybe Neady, maybe over to you and maybe comment on that.
Maxwell has his hand up, but maybe to just comment on that before he says something. I'm muted. I think the dynamics or the especially in architecture education, I think is different. It differs from context to context. I know, for example, in Kenya, we were less than 15% of girls or women in while studying, but then also it doesn't necessarily, I think the dynamic of, even I think in the West, or the dynamic of moving on from studying to practice it does change, because then the structures that are there for architects to practice don't necessarily cater for women, because the practice, even architecture education is programmed in a certain way, and it doesn't necessarily create space for women to practice. Well, it is changing, it's a culture that's changing. There still needs to be a lot of structural changes, both in education and in transitioning to practice. And that's something I think architects like Lise and I should work on, in terms of like the kind of activism that Lise, for example, is doing, and the kind of activism that architects that have come before us are doing is also important. Yeah.
Thanks, Neady. I think it was very good of you to bring it up, Neil. It is really important to think about this. I also find myself in a similar situation, having studied abroad, also at the Bartlett, and now in a new role where the institution is really trying to address the kind of inherent biases that, say, Lise brought up at the beginning, to sort of say, what is the canon of architectural education? You know, why do we not learn about women or architects in the global South? And this is now an ongoing exercise. Look, I think there will always be a differentiation between studying and working abroad. I remember when I was still working from Harare or South Africa, that the opportunities that are afforded outside bring a strange legitimacy to the work that you're doing within. So that was always something that I found difficult to reconcile. And interestingly, also, some of the work that we do, wherein we kind of acknowledge the role of participatory practices, is less valued in the countries that we're coming from. And that was always also something that was difficult to reconcile. Look, within my new role, myself and others are very much looking to change the system. There's a lot being done with regards to thinking about widening participation, right? To sort of say who has access, especially within the built environment, to create it, right? Historically, cities have been places designed for and by men, in particular, particularly men from like this Western ideology. And this concept of, and Gustavo's just put it in the chat, it would be great to have him join us, of, you know, not just decolonizing, but also addressing the class disparities within the built environment, to sort of say, what does it mean to provide opportunities, but also this kind of access to even public space and green space within the city. I think the pandemic was really good in highlighting. I'm going to share with everyone in the room a new scholarship that's particularly aimed at sub-Saharan Africa from the Bartlett, and I'd love for you all to share it and consider it if you can, because it really does sort of say we want to make a difference within the built environment. Obviously, within the wider faculty, the Bartlett has the DPU, the Developmental Planning Unit, which has always looked outwardly, because, you know, they look from a more NGO background of development and less just from this kind of architectural view. But it's definitely something that I think architects and other designers and researchers are starting to hopefully ask more and more. It's a little slow, but I'd love for it to be a conversation that has legs. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, maybe we can share that onto the YouTube. It's been posted by Gustavo on the YouTube. Maybe Lisa. I mean, I was stunned by your overview. That was absolutely astonishing and really in education and informative. Lisa, do you really sort of say something about how you see that the kind of disparities across Africa itself? I mean, you were doing an overall view.
Right. So I think like all these initiatives basically, okay, just personally mine, but like it's based on like creating solutions with those within like those gaps we see and we find ourselves living with, and through those challenges that we face because of the type of education we have received, or rather we did not receive. So we find ourselves searching for like solutions, and we find ourselves trying to create it and then share resources. So like while doing that, there's so many. I realized like along the continents, we're not the only one feeling like this, and we're not the only ones struggling to find how can I say this, to find a balanced and stable like read or like a way of like navigating. So I've been as well recording these different methods, or let's say different as well, collaborating with different initiatives that provide certain solutions. And one way for this, especially in this capitalism era, there are people who are interested to offer solutions and do research that provide like empowerment to us as African architects or students, in order to like be empowered, even though we cannot afford, let's say, going to a grade school, and we don't have that kind of influence. So these are issues we have been facing, but one thing I found is that there's so many people who are willing to work to respond to it correctly, properly. For example, I shared an Instagram profile of CPDI Africa, and Architecture is Free. Architecture is Free is like a global foundation of architects and how can I say this, architects or researchers in the field who are willing to to provide support to the community of architects, but also students. It was born within the COVID times, because students weren't having enough support from schools because everybody was working from home. So now it offers like free mentorship. It doesn't matter if you're in Africa, you can have a mentor from Harvard University, for example, and you just have to be connected. So like there's so many ways that we can work together in order to establish new systems. And as well, one inspiring platform, or I think it works as a school or as well as a university, is CPDI Africa, which is like a global studio for African-centered architecture, where the research-based, they do projects, research based on research on the context of Africanism. And so basically, they show you that it's possible to create architecture and urbanities that highlights or that celebrates the people who uses that navigates those spaces. So it's definitely a call for everyone to participate. For example, Architecture is Free is was founded by someone in the States, but we find ourselves celebrating. I mean, collaborating with someone from Ghana is collaborating with someone from Brazil to see how slavery and colonialism relate, and so many initiatives are birthed within this these initiatives, which is a great idea and a means of support system. Yeah.
Let me hand back to Neady. I mean, I should be stepping back and letting Neady take charge here.
So Mohamed has his hand up next, so yeah, you can speak.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about 2 points. Firstly, for the women empowerment, especially in Arab region and in Africa, females facing a lot of challenges, starting from the start to choose the education itself, to choose engineering or architecture. They have challenges comes from the family. Because they thought that going to the site or construction or architecture is not their field. So the challenges comes from the nearest circle for them, and then if you are trying to convince them, then you have to have a lot of exposure about architecture, and then tell it in the social media, and then when they say it is like when the example here for Lise, when they are profiling the architecture, and when they see there is a lot of architectural examples for women who did a lot of famous example. Actually, for this mosque, I didn't know that it's for women that who did design, and actually I was amazed because it is a really good, wonderful example for it. And then if we profile it and then we provide it in the social media and everything, then they will have a less challenges. And then also after when I was in Germany, and actually when I go there, I find a lot of successful women examples there. They are challenging the world by themselves. They are going to there and learn with themselves and work so they can fund themselves. Actually, they can do a lot of things more than you think. So if there is also like here, it's a platform for females, if they can share their experiences about traveling abroad and how they can challenge all of these things in their education, and then provide also the other females about how they can challenge it and do it and facilitate it for them by making a communication channels or something like this, like a network for a social media between all of them. I think it will make it easier for them also as well. And also moving to the educational, my second part is moving to the education thing. And also you must, like every one of us, like me as I'm in a university thing, and everyone in education must share their giving courses about the social thing and how they can integrate themselves in the community and doing the stakeholders things. And also when you are doing for your faculty, it's not for the students, it's also should be for the families as well, to make a sessions with them and then encourage them to come. And it should come from the preparatory or from the child thing. Not you shouldn't go for the recommended student, which is in the secondary school or something like this. You should go for the children's and then raise it with them, and then you will have like a society raised that's architecture or engineering or something. There is nothing a woman can face it.
Thank you, Mohamed. I think when we listen to what we are discussing, I think it's becoming like a running theme in terms of the absencing and thinking about like even women in architecture and even not necessarily even just women that are architects. I think in my context, for example, my master's thesis was on women-built architecture, because in the northern region, a lot of the architecture or a lot of the vernacular architecture is built by women, because women are the homemakers. So I think it's becoming a challenge for us to not necessarily even just highlight it, but to think about archival work, because a lot of information, especially in the region, is either is not recorded, is not canonized, or is not considered important. So I think it's upon us, the coming generation of African creators, to think about how, we think about the archives that are missing or the archives that are not there. And then, so there's a question on the chat that's I think mostly for Maxwell. So with regard to technology in the West, in tech, people often hear about the extraordinary leapfrog that happened in mobiles versus landlines. So Maxwell spoke to it a little, referencing the spread of devices, but the disparity in data is there. I have been wondering if we will or are seeing a similar leapfrog of new sustainable energy technologies across Africa, and what lessons have been learned, what warnings, etc., to help empower communities into an equitable green transition. I have a comment on this, but I think Maxwell, you can go first.
Okay, thanks, Neady. I think technology is quite interesting. There has been at least a realization that as good as it is, there are issues. And I'm not just speaking to disinformation. I'm speaking to, what Shoshana Zuboff calls this kind of surveillance capitalism, right? And there's an interesting researcher who I think is from a background in law, Sylvia Tamale at Makerere University in Uganda, who speaks to kind of these digital systems as this kind of neo-colonialism, right? Equating the likes of Facebook with, say, the Dutch East India Company. And honestly, if you look at the map of Africa, and if you look at the advent, particularly post-2008, post the global financial crisis, of internet connections, particularly submarine cables, data cables to the continent, it really follows these roots of colonial capitalism of the past. And a lot of these networks aren't owned and operated by national states. They're run by individual corporations. And so in that, then there is an issue between, yes, they may provide, say, accessibility for communications that weren't there, but that communication is then mandated through the desires of the corporation. So, for example, there was this consortium called Internet.org that included Facebook, that included Ericsson, and others. And what they did is they offered certain services at a reduced tariff or completely free as a way of getting people kind of hooked onto those services, So this is how on the continent, you have these WhatsApp bundles, you have these Facebook bundles that are completely different from just getting data bundles, right? These aren't just coincidences. They are set up in a way to really predetermine how technology shapes our urban environments. And so I'm currently working on a project that looks particularly at delivery platforms. So what in the West we'd call Uber Eats or DoorDash or Deliveroo, etc. And these exist on the continent in similar forms. And even before I got here, where in London you have this phenomenon of 10-minute deliveries, there was a shopping company in South Africa that would say, yes, you can get your groceries from app to door in that amount of time. And honestly, truthfully, this is unsustainable, really. Yes, it has set up this so-called ghost kitchens or ghost stores, which don't face outwardly to the public. They're only there to service the digital economies. But it's incumbent on a system of labor that borrows from informal practices, non-standard practices, that is embedded in a servitude, that really disenfranchises a lot of people. And I'm a big fan. I'm not here to say, I'm a Luddite and technology should not be something that we think about, but we should be really mindful of what it means. And I think an analysis, which is why I think Mohamed's work is so interesting, because what has been of immense value on the continent is the use of technology by individuals and communities wherein it matters. So I think particularly to the participatory mapping of informal communities by, say, SDI, shack and slum dwellers, network around the world, wherein people have a say, and they are empowered. They map their communities, put themselves on the cadastral maps, thereby putting themselves on the voter registry and then giving themselves a voice. And so that there is a use of technology that is, overall positive. But I think how we use technologies should be interrogated. And it is being done so, I think, more so in the global south, I think, than anywhere else. And I think there are many lessons that can be learned. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have this sort of similar comment on that. I think in thinking about, because it's interesting that Maxwell, you talked about data and the identification of the urban. I think we are having a system where, I mean, Africa is like, we have the fastest growing economies in terms of countries right now by virtue of, I mean, a lot of us are left behind and we're just now catching up. And we're starting to see a lot of, in terms of data, for example, in Kenya, there has been an issue of a lot of the startup culture is around financial services. So a lot of these financial services were collecting data from people without them knowing. I mean, there is a proliferation. We have over 90% of access to, data and mobile phones, but then these corporations are using the vast collection of data in terms of, and this is data that is influencing their services, and they're using it as a form of exploitation. So for me, the thing is, and why Maxwell's project was interesting for me is the data does influence the kind of digital tools that are created. And think about how Facebook is used, for example, in the States, and how it's being used in the global South, in India, and in Africa, etc., is different. So the way we use these tools is different. And so the data has to be, I mean, we say everything is data right now, but there's no ethnographic data, for example, how people in Nairobi use the urban area is not necessarily, it's placed in a certain way, but it's not data that is ethnographic, that is by us or for us. So I think it's important that we have, thinking about the digital and moving beyond just things that are standardized, is thinking about how we create our own data and how we also think about data in terms of it not being exploitative. And also these corporations that are coming should, someone is saying that Facebook is currently banned in Uganda and people use VPNs. Again, it's there's the system of technology and power, and us as a culture that is different is also another way to think about Africa. Also in thinking about Africa not being a country, we are very many peoples, very many localities, etc., and we use everything differently. And this is something that we also need to think about. I'm not sure if there's another question. So hoping, there's a question, how much is too much profit? Without proper tax laws, we still have neoliberal policies, and that disadvantage the people, that does not add to quality of life. And also having to think about architecture is more than shelter, and it's also surrounds and creates context within our spatial domains. I don't know if anyone has a comment on that. Then there's hoping that some decentralization of green power and energy solutions might be significant there, but funding models, community empowerment, etc. Another is, how do we protect and share revenue and resources for communities? That's a very good question. Then there's a question for Bruno. How does he see data? How do we build communities? What tools do we need? And also there's the issue of representation. Does anyone else have comments about these? I think we have sort of moved away from architecture, but then again, if we think about architecture and if we think about what the future or design or what the future is, I think these are things we need to think about, because we are the emerging creators. I think these are discussions we need to have. So I'll give it to Bruno to give a comment on the question.
Yeah, thank you, Neady. I think data is the platform in which we get numbers and also how we get connected. And for example, in Uganda, where I live, data is very expensive and not everybody can access data. So it becomes a privilege for those who can access internet to share resources. And as a community, I think the best way is that the people that are supporting communities through governments need to do a check, especially in countries which are ruled and being operated by governments that are not accepting change. And these governments continue to receive support, and they are using actually technology like phones and internet to divert the population and how they are thinking towards their needs or what is the next on the table or who is going to rule next. A case in point is that during the election time, for example, in Uganda, you find that the government can use telecom companies to promote, while maybe other political parties do not have that luxury. So you find that also data is still controlled by the system. And that's what goes back to people power. Like if you have any way you want to support anyone, find somebody on the grassroots who's doing something amazing, support their project. That's how you block the middleman. Thank you.
I think, Gustavo, do you have your hand up? Would you like to speak?
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Neady, and thank you for organizing this, and thank you all of the panelists. I specifically wanted to go and discuss the idea of kind of these speculative futures, or I'm interested in the kind of the decolonialist project. Like, what are the systems that are oppressing a true freedom? I think the existential crisis that we have with climate change is so real, and it seems like our leaders aren't really doing much, and that causes layered suffering. So my question is, are we having a tough time accessing technology because it empowers kind of this citizen science? Like, if the citizenry knew what was happening, would we act? And so my question would be, how can we as young architects or professionals come together and make the proper change for people? And maybe that's a general question. I've just been pondering this philosophically. Like, what are the things we should be reading? What should we be doing? How can architects come together that we're not disempowered?
I think Maxwell had his hand up.
Thank you. I think that's a great question, Gustavo. One of the things that for me was very important was this moment when the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, particularly Section 8, urban areas, got this award from the Nobel because of the work that they had done in showing that informal communities, so as Bruno was talking about, this kind of indigenous knowledge system had an effect in mitigating against climate change. So this kind of organizing, the use of natural materials, the way in which their agricultural practices work with natural life cycles as opposed to against them is something in which we should value. And some of that comes out of organizing, comes out of the use of technology in highlighting this. And I think it's for me a key kind of bit of text. And so the work of David Satterthwaite, I think, is important in this regard. Diane Mitlin, the late Vanessa Watson, it's all really kind of, I think, showcases, shows off, and just to finish the phrase, shows out, how important that work is, as opposed to a reliance on the so-called established standards, right? So coming from design, we all have codes and regulations in which we have been taught, but a lot of those systems disregard the knowledge that people can bring, particularly people from outside of Western colonization. And I think it's kind of for me an interesting way to start sometimes. I'll leave it there.
Mohamed, can you go next?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, what makes me really laughing about that, because there is still people in media or people in the public, they don't believe there is a climate change. Actually, you can find them everywhere in social media or in TikTok, or you're opening Facebook or something like this. There's nothing called climate change. And then that's because on the level of the governmental and countries and international side, they are talking about climate change on conferences, and they don't go for people and talk with them. And then when people find that people who are talking about the climate change is not the public, and then they say it's the policy makers, and then they don't believe it, because actually when there is something enters the politics, they don't believe it. I can talk about the culture at the Arab region. I don't know for the all, but then when I went to people and talk with them in a lot of my researches and talk with them about climate change, they told us no, that we are too beyond when there is something happened with climate change. We are so far from it. However, it's in the air. It's literally in the air around them. Everything around them is changing because of climate change. And then also, I think that if these international efforts going from making this conferences and then go to the site, go to the people and talk with them and then convince them there's a climate change, they can do a lot, really a lot. And then for us, like our rule, I think also we have to go to talk with people as well. And then maybe from my experience, I think it's the lack of information and data. Because when I try to talk with the governmental authorities or the municipality or something like this, and when I talk with them that I need this information because of my research, and then I need it because it's something affecting climate change and we have to face it, and then everyone get panicked because maybe I will get something in my research against the policy of the country or something like this, then they don't provide me with the data. So it's always with the way you are talking with people, and then if they are get introduced enough about it, and then these policymakers, they know they personally they are in danger because of the climate change, they maybe can cooperate with us about it. So I think all of us, we have to go to talk with people, include more cooperation with colleagues like this, and then every one of us in his cooperation, if he is, even if he's working in social, working in culture, working on whatever, if he introduce the climate change as one of his principles, I think everything will change, because we will introduce it in a lot of research topics topics, and then it will get introduced more to the public. Because even for the environment, when a lot of research is talking about sustainability, they're talking about sustainability itself, but not how we can sustain against the climate change, how we can mitigate the climate change. And now we have another critical things that we have to deal with firstly before making the world sustainable. Then we have to face the climate change as one of the crucial things that it's an extension level actually that we have to go through with firstly, and then we decide about the luxurious things. That's from my side.
Bruno, you're next, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Neady. I'm back to share about mostly our perceptions and misinterpretation of who we think a refugee is and what a refugee camp is, and maybe some of these are some of the blocking words that we find that we use that control the amount of extraordinary skills and abilities we find in these places. How do we work as a people power and looking down to the spaces in which people are helping people instead of relying all our efforts onto like NGOs and big corporations to come to the rescue, rather to look at the people who are staying maybe in these camps and engaging them in activities that they create. A great example is a friend I made, Patrick Muvunga, who fled Congo, DRC in the late 2000s, and he lives in Achivali, but he has been able to build a space called Opportunity, which is a hub, an education hub that is about refugees creating opportunities for themselves. And they've been able to come up with so many different concepts and projects that support the communities in which they live. They've been building a number of upcycled houses, structures with bottles, and they've been using whatever is within their mind and environment to create and build. And maybe that's some of the things that control how we think about architecture, or when we think about development, is that we leave out the people who are building because of a certain title or skill that is required from a formal institution. So there's a lot of informal knowledge and indigenous knowledge that is on the ground that keeps being left untapped because it has no space. What is being talked about is what already has a space in society. Thank you.
That is a very important note, Bruno. I think it's one of the biggest takeaways from here is, I think where we come from, we have a great opportunity of the diversity of communities and kind of seeing and working with these communities. I think one of the things that I remember when I was studying in Germany, I had this thing of we have to help marginalized communities, but I think we need to realize that marginalized communities are already working and thinking as a form of survival. And I think this is knowledge that I think as Africa, because I think as African architects or as African creators, we have a sort of special space we take in. We don't necessarily just create out on a bubble, because you have to think about where you came from, how it is, what it looks like. And this is something we need to tap into in terms of thinking we're not just working for marginalized communities. Marginalized communities are already working, and we need to augment that. And I think the various ways, the various mediums that we work with, and thinking about the digital or thinking about, participatory design, we have to not necessarily go back but we have to think about it in terms of we're not creating from above, we are creating from within. And I think this is like the special place that we take as African creators. Anything else? Anyone else with a comment? Any final?
Neady, I want to step in for a second. I think that what today that I've learned is that there's so much to share. I guess I'm in this kind of frustrated part of my life where I just go, I'm tired of all these people that are in charge that don't really look after people, families, children, education, food, shelter. And they take educated disciplines like architecture, medicine, engineering, and then they distract us with, I would say, aesthetics and things that are beautiful, let's say. But when you have a beautiful object surrounded by poverty or misery or destruction, what does that produce in the maker or the thinker? That's really what I'm thinking through today in this panel. I'm just completely and utterly at a loss why the individuals that have been a part of these schools all over the planet have not really risen together with one voice and said, enough, let's work together. I'm just curious to hear from Maxwell, you, Neady, as well, or anyone, Lise, like what do we need to do now to make a difference? And I'm speaking from someone from a privileged place. I've been educated in the West, but I have lived in another country in South America, in Bogota, Colombia, and we don't have advantages. You know, there are problems everywhere. What can we do?
Right. I think I know I'm very young in this field, but what I've learned so far is that there's so much to do, and I believe everybody who's growing within the field has something they can give back, either to the communities or students. So there is an impact you can do with however much you have, knowledge, resources. Frankly, I find architecture. How can I say this? It's. I feel like it's limited. The way it's taught, the way it's practiced. While we're navigating the field, we find ourselves questioning so many things and looking for community. You just, I don't know. Maybe it's also like there's like also an age gap, perhaps, especially for the youngest architects that are currently, coming around. And maybe that's why, but there's a lot we can still do beyond, working every day to make a public. So like that's one thing that does my mind on and myself when I'm trying every little thing, every little work I do. I try to share the process, tutorials, and talk about anything, so give back. I feel like everyone here can do that in a certain way. Yeah.
Anyone else? I think that was a very it's always a very heavy question, and other people ask what they can do, because I mean we come from, like I said, it's to be an African is to exist in hybridities, especially also thinking about Africans who've been to the diaspora. It's thinking about, so if I think about urbanism, I have to think about post-colonial urbanism and all those things. Like it's such a system and such a structural conveyor belt that it's hard to pinpoint where someone can come in and say, oh, this is where we're going to do to change it. I think it depends on the personal approach of everyone else. I think for me personally, my approach is always thinking about the communities that I come from and how they make, and also being aware of the fact that they're making these things that we say, for example, the refugees that have to sort of remake or work around systems to exist or to survive. It's not something that should be glorified. I think it's making for survival is different as opposed to making to thrive. And I think if we're going to think about a future, is we have to think about systems that are not necessarily just for survival, or systems that are subverting systems that don't work. So if people are going to, if anyone wants to help, I think, and thinking about points of privilege, coming from studying abroad and coming back home, I have to think about I come from a point of privilege, but also thinking about coming to sort of disrupt with my privilege and come into systems that work a certain way is also difficult. So it's sort of a weird workaround where you have to think about this making for thriving and this making for survival and these systems that don't necessarily work, and sort of having a mishmash where it's collaborative with everyone else. Because if you ask people what they need, they do say what they need. They know what they need. I think it's weird as an architect to have there's this Western ideology of an architect as the maker god. I doubt that in my context it does not work, because I mean you will make something and people will, you'll put a building and say this building is an office, and people will turn the lower part into a whole cafe. So it's very contextual, and it's something you have to work with people to work around. Yeah, and also collaboration. Ruganzu said collaborations, yes. And I'm glad that this has happened, because I know African creators are there. I know even digital creators are there. But for us to connect, I think the network needs to be created, because we need to work together. Yeah. Well, Maxwell had some.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a great question, Gustavo. And I'll just echo what Neady and Lise have said. I think the connections are important, but also this idea of looking at the limitations of architecture. Neady and I are connected through someone we've been discussing in the chat, Nerea Amaraselarudi, who's done a lot of work since about the early 2010s on the spaces for refugees. So really looking at the built environment, architecture on the continent. Nerea and I, we've never met in person. We've only ever collaborated virtually. So we were working with 5 other architects, space practitioners across the continent, and looking at how we understand the spaces on the continent, contemporary spaces, particularly those designed through participatory collaboration. And one of the things we made sure to do was not just divide it through like urban or rural, but understand that natural spaces, because like land tenure, the ownership of our land is important, and also refugee spaces should be considered. And Maria has worked a lot, and with a good friend of mine, also Tamar Berlander, looking at really formalizing refugee spaces, because the work for refugees in Africa is some of the best work that's being done. Africa and the MENA region have been taking care of their neighbors. Yes, there are political considerations to think about, but the majority of refugees in the world are housed here. And they've been housed in places for more than 20 years. And so what Maria has done is to work with UNICEF and others to really say, we should start building spaces for refugees in bricks. Because, for the longest time, it was all tents. And it was all, his name escapes me now. There's a Japanese architect who proposed these bamboo shelter structures. But what she does is to sort of say, we have to acknowledge that these are people, and a lot of them are in urban centers, but they're also in kind of these segregated refugee camps, where usually you don't get buildings that are built to last. So she went about with UNICEF building schools out of bricks, which at the time was, kind of revolutionary. And then I think this idea of connections, as I mentioned, like in the space, in the diaspora, normally that's the only place where we meet, getting to meet people from around the continent is so important, those connections where you suddenly realize that we all have this kind of shared vision, shared story, and kind of shared knowledge that is beneficial is, I think, something that we should credit the technology like we're using today for. And yeah, I'll leave it there just to be brief.
Great. Bruno, I think you have a comment.
Yeah, I was adding to what Maxwell was talking about, and I've been privileged to work on a project with Francis Kele, who I've not met in person, but I know he's a great architect from the continent. And I pick a leaf in his leaving his hometown and going to Germany, to Berlin, and coming back home and building schools. And these schools are built with clay, which is a material that we all have on our continent, and it's cheap and available in most spaces. So I think the question of what can we do is already being done. The more we get more collaborations and possibilities to work on projects together, because this is what was not happening in the times. And if we go 10, 20 years back, we wouldn't be having this kind of conversation happening. But I look forward, being my first year, starting my PhD. I'm looking forward to all of you already asking to collaborate with you on some material and exchange. And that's how we keep it moving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bruno. That is true. I think that a lot of collaboration, I hope a whole lot of collaborations will be born out of this, and an even bigger network, because I think it is important. Do you have any more questions? Great, then I think we can invite Neil to have the final.
Well, thanks, Neady. I mean, it's really, this is your session, and you've done an amazing job. You know, I just want to say, I think Maxwell really put the nail on the head in the sense he was saying, you know, we can use this technology to keep those dialogues going, these connections happening. And, you know, that's really what our intention, I think, in Digital Futures is, to try and find this platform where we can share information and break down barriers and share educational ideas. It's not about fetishizing the technology. It's really about how you use it, how you harness it in some ways. And I'm kind of reminded of a comment that was made, this is a long time back, Douglas Rushkoff, he teaches in NYU, I think, and he gave in 2002 the first ever conference I organized on digital technology. He said, well, you know, the point is you have to understand and harness these technologies for the benefit of society. You know, when internet first came along, you know, it was kind of people saying, "Oh, this is a great emancipatory future. We will, you know, things will happen," and all we got was spam. You know, and I think we really have to really understand how this technology could be used for social ends. And this is what I really appreciate about this session, is how every single speaker has spoken about the social importance of architecture. It's not just about, a comment I made when I was years ago was, you know, architecture is less about putting bricks upon top of bricks, but really more about imagining a better future world. And I think every single contributor today has really made this kind of has echoed this. And I think this has been a really revelatory session. I mean, this is really what Digital Future is all about not about the West preaching to everyone else, but really about listening to voices and bringing everyone together. And I think this is exactly what's happening. I mean, we've come to the end of this session, but really, I mean, this is, I think, just the beginning of a new conversation, or a series of new conversations. So let's just see how we can keep this going. What I see here, I see the future. I mean, Neady, I just am astonished. You're going to have such an important role in the future of architecture, and all of you really. And let's just see what we can do from this. But this is such an encouraging session. I'm just blown away by it. So thank you, Neady. Thank you, all the contributors. I mean, and let's keep the dialogue going. But this is so special, and exactly what we were thinking about in terms of digital futures. So thank you, Neady. I think maybe just to say just tomorrow, to say that we have a session on our doctoral consortium tomorrow, and I don't know. The other thing I wanted to mention just briefly is that we have our first ever session in Portuguese coming up very soon as well. I mean, we're just trying to open up these dialogues in different languages, and this is part of it. So thank you everyone. This has been very special. Neady, amazing, absolutely amazing.
But before we go, Neil, I just wanted to make sure that that your course, that tomorrow, Jeff Hawkins, what time is it?
It's going to be 1 hour later than the starting session today. It's going to be 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time rather than 9. So it's 1 hour later. But it's going to be very special. Jeff Hawkins. It's followed up by 2 sessions on AI and architecture. That actually is very super interesting. It's getting very interesting series. But anyway, thank you, everyone. Gustavo, do you want to carry on?
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. And then just to say that this series has been extremely provocative, instructive, and please look at the archives. And 1 second here. You can find them on our YouTube channel, and you can find different talks. The Joshua Bach talk for the Doctoral Consortium was great. There was Chalmers. Benjamin Bratton was last week. We also have many technical tutorials, and my colleague Bavleen, who's the organizer, is also here. If she wants to say anything. For next week, on March the 5th, we will have Form Finding and Digital Fabrication Essentials with Roberto Arguelles. So please, if you want to sign up, please distribute to your students and colleagues. It's going to be a great event. The technical tutorials happen twice a month, so please stay tuned. If you want to reach out, please reach out to us at Digital Futures Team, Digital Futures World. We are looking for new teammates, and hopefully we can recruit a few people here. Maxwell Neady, calling people out, why not? And we want to thank everyone who came today. I thought that it was extremely provocative, and I also want to thank Neil, but especially Neady, for really taking the lead. And I look forward to more to come. Thanks again.
Just to also say, just thanks to the Digital Futures team behind the scenes. A lot of work goes into this thing behind the scenes, and we don't see those people, but they're making a huge contribution. So thank you so much to them as well. So amazing. Thank you, everyone. So we will see you tomorrow if there's one to come along. And to say this talk will itself be uploaded onto the Digital Futures YouTube channel. So please share it with your colleagues and friends. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Neady. Thank you, the contributors. Fantastic. And thank you, Digital Futures.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
Yeah, have a good night.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Yeah, ciao.
Okay.